Welcome to the Corporate Director Podcast, where we discuss the experiences and ideas behind what's working in corporate board governance in our digital tech-fueled world. Here, you'll discover new insights from corporate leaders and governance researchers with compelling stories about corporate governance, strategy, board culture, risk management, digital transformation, and more.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the Corporate Director Podcast, the voice of modern governance. My name is Dottie Schindlinger, Executive Director of the Diligent Institute, and I'm joined once again by my co-host, Meghan Day, Strategy Leader here at Diligent. And we have a special guest joining us today, our very own CEO and President, Brian Stafford. Brian and Meghan, how are you both doing today?
I'm doing great. How you doing, Brian?
I'm doing really well. It's so great to be on the pod with both Dottie, you, and Meghan again.
You know, it's been too long, Brian. We realized we were looking back to see when was the last time, and I honestly don't even know how long it's been, but this is our 150th episode, if you can believe it. And so we wanted to bring you back and talk a little bit about this milestone. A lot has happened.
Well, first, congratulations to you, Dottie, and you, Meghan, as well, for 150 episodes. It's kind of a crazy milestone, and it's been fun to join you for a few of them.
Well, speaking of milestones, we know that not too long ago, you hit your 10-year anniversary at Diligent. And so we thought maybe it'd be a good chance to have you come on as our president and CEO and talk about the last 10 years here at Diligent. What have been some of the big standouts for you over this past decade of development here at Diligent?
Well, Dottie, don't give me credit for 10 years yet. I think 10 years will officially be on April Fool's Day of this year. So I got a few more days before people can remember back to April Fool's Day 10 years ago when I started, which was kind of like a cover story from The Onion. But anyway, so what has the last 10 years been like at Diligent? I think three things I would highlight. First, team. Second, our clients. And third, our products. On the team, it's been super exciting. 10 years ago, we were 300 or so people in our team. Meghan was there at that time. And today we've grown to 2,200 people and a truly global business across a ton of different functions and, really, really, really fantastic team. We got to team up with many people along the way. Dottie, kind of when you joined the Diligent team through an acquisition and many other team members. And so on the team side or the people side, it's been really awesome to get to team up with some folks for the entire 10 years plus, and then other folks to join along the way. On the client side, I've just been unbelievably fortunate to have had the opportunity to get to work with so many esteemed general counsels, directors, board members, non-executive, executive directors, and so many people across different industries as we've grown, from people who lead risk functions to people who lead finance organizations to people who lead compliance organizations. And it's been a privilege to be able to learn from all of you all over the course of the last 10 years. And it's also been interesting just to learn how much the journey for many of you has changed over the last 10 years from, performance as always a core part of what we do as organizations, whether you're a nonprofit or for-profit, a school board. It's always just analyzing how well you're performing against your goals. And what's happened in the last 10 years has been so much of a broader backdrop of other risks that all of us need to balance in everything we do. And so much so that, one director said something, a few years ago that really resonated with me, that governance has become an exercise in risk management. And I think that kind of typifies what the last 10 years has encompassed. And lastly, on the product side, it's been such a great pleasure and fun to help to work with our team to build product, help them meet those needs of our directors and our company users over the course of the last 10 years, to help to move from a board portal to a governance application to a broader GRC and risk management platform for our clients. And that's been a blast. And it circles back around to how thankful I am for our team and our clients for partnering on the journey.
That's a great reflection, Brian. But after 10 years, I do think there's still a lot to be excited for. What's to come in 2025? What are you most excited about?
Yeah, I think the reason I'm most excited is the comment I raised on just how awesome our product has evolved over the course of the last 10 years to meet our clients' needs. And one of the reasons I'm, as excited if I've not ever been, or as I've told our team, I'm probably more excited than in fact, I have been in my 10 years at Diligent, because I think the product outlook and how we've just invested so much from so many great people on our team to help to be able to deliver so much more for our clients. And I'm pretty fired up about the age of artificial intelligence that we operate in, because it is yet another reminder of a potential risk on the horizon for our clients. But on the flip side of that, just the way I think that artificial intelligence can help our clients evolve how they do governance with more the right information at the right time, powered with the right insights to help them ask the right questions and make the right decisions. But even more so as we think about the backdrop of risk. And I think AI has a unique opportunity to help so many of us, so many of our clients at Diligent, help to better identify signal and noise and help to make sure that they can mitigate those risks that are out there. I, for one, am kind of one of those people who I struggle sleeping at night because I'm always worried about something, some sort of risk that's out there, something I missed, something that maybe I didn't get the right information or conclusion from. And I think of AI as being someone that can be someone, some entity that can be helpful in making sure that I don't miss anything, make me better. And hopefully through that, help to make my organization at Diligent, but hope so many other organizations, hopefully safer from helping to make sure our clients can be abreast of all the most important information and make sure they don't miss anything.
Brian, I know you're so fired up about this year. I think we share that, but I'd love to have you use the looking glass to go a little bit beyond this year. If we get you back for the 300th episode, where do you think Diligent will be by then? It's probably
Wow,
been another 5 years from now.
the 300th episode, and I've been at Diligent for 15 years at that time. That's
Yes.
quite a few milestones for all three of us. I think I would probably highlight the three things that I started out with. It all comes down to people, our clients, and our product. And riffing off on the product side, I think it's been awesome to see the true product potential unleashed at Diligent like I've never seen it before. And if I think about the way that we're going to be partnering with in a seamless way with our clients, helping them out with governance, risk, and compliance over the next 5 years, I think what our clients are going to find is the bar or the pressure, the number of risks that we have to provide oversight or governance over is likely going to continue as it has over the last 5 years. But and one of the backdrops that so many of our clients will say is with even more risks, even more things to manage, even more things to stay in compliance of. Most of our clients are in functions where you're asked to do more with less. And again, when I come back to the question that you'd asked around the power of AI offers you the ability to do that. It offers you the ability to, as the bar keeps raising for things you're expected, it's tools that help you're able to do that, to manage it, to provide an audit trail around everything you do, test and check, and make sure that you can be a more powerful version of yourself or a more powerful version of the department that you had. And I'm super pumped to see how all of our products and our tools help to meet and exceed the increasing needs of our clients.
Well, thank you for joining us, Brian. Any final thoughts before we let you go?
No, I'll just close with, a huge kudos to Dottie, you and Megan. What a super cool milestone. And a huge thank you for you to help the up level the conversation and dialogue around everything governance, risk, and compliance to help our clients and all of our board members up our collective game. So thank you to all of you and kudos.
Thank you so much for joining us on the show, Brian. It's been great having you back.
Thanks for having me back. I'll see you guys in another 50 episodes.
See you then. Well, Megan, I'm so glad we had a chance to get Brian back on the show. I always really enjoy having him on as our guest so we can kind of pick his brain and find out what's going on from the presidential view.
Well, 150 episodes is wild. And I still remember very clearly episode number one with Brian and a couple of others from the Diligent family. And so much is the same, but man, so much has changed.
Have you gone back and listened to those episodes, Megan? Because I swear both of our voices were like 2 octaves higher. It was only 5 years ago, but I feel like we were little kids. We didn't know what we were doing.
Well, I mean, the world's a lot different than it was 5 years ago.
That is the understatement of the century. I mean, we have lived through so much in the last 5 years. It's been insane. Listen, I'm also excited to talk to our guest today. We were able to take some time and speak to Annalisa Barrett, who's a senior advisor at KPMG's Board Leadership Center, about a very popular topic this year, kind of ironically, given who we just spoke to, but CEO succession. This is something that we learned in our What Directors Think report this year, that CEO succession is very much a topic of interest to directors and is on the rise. We've been seeing a pretty big migration of especially public company CEOs out of those roles, either into retirement or to take a job at a private company, which is kind of interesting. And that sort of tracks with Brian, by the way, because when he came to Diligent, it was a publicly traded company on the New Zealand Stock Exchange. And one of the very first things that he did when he took that role was to take the company private, which is kind of fascinating. So, yeah, Megan, I don't know if you have any thoughts about that, but it is an interesting uptick in CEO departures this past year.
No, let's give it a listen. I mean, from my perspective, I think this is, again, this evergreen area of governance. But in light of the changing world around us, as cliche as it is to say, it is an area that I think needs to be reimagined.
Great. Well, let's give it a listen. Joining us on the Corporate Director podcast today is Annalisa Barrett, Senior Advisor at KPMG's Board Leadership Center. Annalisa, thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Dottie. I'm so thrilled to be here.
Well, let's start off by having you tell our audience a little bit more about what you do at KPMG's Board Leadership Center beyond your title of Senior Advisor. So what are you actually doing there?
Right. I focus on research, directly looking at corporate boards, board practices, board composition, a lot of board diversity work. And in addition to conducting the research, talking to directors and full boards and committees, do a lot of director roundtables and speak to others in the corporate governance community about the emerging issues that are being discussed in boardrooms today.
Well, that's a perfect segue for our conversation about CEO succession planning, because I know one of the things that we learned this year in the What Directors Think survey was that CEO succession planning is kind of rising up the ranks as a board priority for 2025. I'd love to ask your thoughts about that. Why do you think CEO succession planning is such a high priority right now for boards? What's changing?
So I'm really glad to see that it is a high priority for boards. It always should be. And in turbulent times and uncertain times, it is even more important for the board to be focused on having the right CEO in place leading the company. So I think that, companies and boards are focused on ensuring that that continuity of leadership is there for guiding their companies through all the uncertainty that are facing companies today. I mean, we have geopolitical tensions, regulatory changes in the US and abroad, cybersecurity and risks from other emerging technologies, an anxious workforce that is increasingly using its voice to ask for change. So consistently steady and focused leadership in that CEO role is more important now than ever. So given the fact that having a steady and focused leader guiding the company through these turbulent times is so important to firm performance and long-term sustainability, it's important that the board has a plan to ensure that when a CEO transition is necessary, that it happens in a way that is going to lead to the long-term success of the business.
Well, I want to follow up on that final point you just made, Annalisa, because one of the things we learned in our research this year was that boards were seeing CEO succession, particularly an unplanned CEO departure, as a real source of risk and something that they felt could completely upend their strategy for the year. And so I'd love to have you reflect a little bit on when is the right time for boards to talk about this? I mean, I'm sure most boards, in fact, probably all boards, have at least some idea of what they would do if there was an unplanned departure of their CEO. At least I hope they do. How do they start the conversation? What's the right timing? How do they sort of get into it? And what are some of the best practices for leading those discussions, particularly with the incumbent leader?
Right. I think that when to have the conversation is exactly the right question, because my thought is it's all the time. So when a new CEO starts, you have, as part of your ongoing discussion, as they are learning about the business, they can be part of conversations about what the CEO succession planning process looks like. So, as you mentioned, I'll take a step back real quickly. And you mentioned, having a plan for an unplanned transition. It's important, I think, for boards to have a variety of succession plans, at least the process outlined. So, one is for a planned transition, right? Where you have, a CEO that has announced that he or she is retiring in a year, 18 months, and the board and the company has a long time to prepare. The second is for an unplanned transition, but a short term plan. So, either performance reasons or health reasons, the CEO has to leave office and maybe out for a long time, or and not returning, or but there is some time before the CEO actually leaves. So there's a little bit of time for some planning in that unplanned transition scenario, which I think is what you described. And then there's the emergency transition, which is a CEO is there one day and then not the next for one reason or another, tragedy or scandal or whatever the case may be. And so boards should have plans and a documented process in place for each of those types of transitions. And so when it comes to having conversations with a CEO, a sitting CEO, about those different scenarios, it should just be a part of the normal conversation about business continuity that you have with the CEO, and also a part of the conversation that you have on an ongoing basis with the CEO related to leadership development more broadly. So, in that way, the conversations about CEO succession planning aren't set aside as kind of a taboo topic or something that's only whispered about, on the edges of a board meeting, because it's part of the normal operations of the, board's oversight of the leadership of the company. And it isn't seen as a personal affront when it is brought up to the CEO. So if it's part of the normal course of conversation, it's something on the board agenda on a regular cadence, it minimizes the opportunity for the CEO to take it personally when it is brought up as an issue to be discussed. Now, of course, there are always personalities involved in any of these types of discussions. And so, one of the aspects that's also really important is that the board really knows the CEO as a person and has a good understanding of how he or she might receive discussions about their successor.
So that's some really interesting insight. But as you're speaking, I'm sort of reflecting on the idea that, in the 30 years I've been working with boards, I have seen this process be driven by multiple different personas. I've seen it be driven by the board chair. I've seen it be driven by the governance chair. I've seen it be driven by the CEO. Um, who should be driving the process, and what should the process look like?
Good governance practices dictate that the board should drive the CEO selection and succession planning process. But of course, in reality, the CEO is often heavily involved, and in many circumstances, that is appropriate. However, following from what I said before about the board having a process to follow when it comes to any CEO transition, it's important that the board oversees that process and that the process is followed. So, to answer your specific question, we often see the responsibility for the, planning and the execution of a succession plan is managed by the nominating and governance committee. Um, Certainly, if the board chair is not on that committee and is an independent chair or a lead director, then they are heavily involved as well. We sometimes see it in the compensation committee as well, given that the compensation committee is often responsible for, CEO performance overall when assessing performance for incentive plan purposes. But I think it's not as important which committee it's housed in and who has, which committee has that responsibility. It's that it is delegated to a committee that has a regular cadence for overseeing, thinking about updating the succession plan, and then executing it or triggering the steps involved in executing it when indeed it is needed, especially in that emergency scenario. Because what you don't want to have happen is, a lot of times, we'll see that succession planning is a full board responsibility. And while that certainly is true, it's incumbent upon everyone on the board to get to know the internal candidates and to be thinking about, what may happen in the event of a CEO transition. It is important for there to be someone responsible for the triggering of the plan, especially in those emergency circumstances. And so, as long as that's delineated in a committee charter and that investors have the ability to see, which committee, which directors, to hold accountable in the event that they have concerns about CEO succession planning, that I think is what works best.
Annalisa, as you're speaking, I realized we weren't explicit about something that I think we probably should be. I'd be willing to bet that as we've been having this conversation, we've both been assuming we're talking about publicly traded companies. Is that a fair statement? So I would imagine this process could look, in fact, I know for a fact that it looks quite different if you're talking about, especially, founder-led private companies or companies, family-owned companies. Anything that you want to share, in terms of insights of how this process might need to work if we're talking about not a public company, but we're talking about a private company, particularly one led by a very strong founder or family member?
Absolutely. And it's so important, as you mentioned, because quite often those companies do not survive a CEO transition, whether it's, the first generation or subsequent generations. And so, in my view, it is important for private companies, for family companies to have a board, first of all, and to have on their board truly independent board members who can play a role understanding the sensitivities involved with either a founder and or a family-led company, but to also be there to be the independent viewpoint in the room that can help move past the familial relationships or the personality of the founder to think about what's best for the long-term success of the business. And ideally, that is in a planned transition that, goes along with the vision of the family and or the founder. But at the very least, the other stakeholders of a private company, still rely on those independent directors to play the fiduciary role of really ensuring that the leadership of the company allows for long-term sustainability, allows for the employees of the company to maintain their jobs, the customers to continue to receive the goods and services offered by the business. And it's interesting because we also see these dynamics in public companies as well. And the reason that I generally focus on public companies is really because of the disclosure required for regulatory purposes, and that gives us a bit of an insight into how boards are thinking about the CEO succession planning process. So years ago, I did a study with John McCumnick when he was at the IRC Institute. And we looked at CEO succession planning disclosure in proxy statements to see if companies that disclosed a robust CEO succession plan, kind of as we've described, the kind of three scenarios, which committee has oversight, etc., actually subsequently had successful transitions when a transition was necessary for one reason or another. And in fact, they did. And I don't think it was because the disclosure made that succession plan more successful. What it highlighted to us is the boards that have proactively and diligently developed a plan for each of the three succession planning processes and have kind of thought through and can document their process, who's responsible, etc., that foresight and planning actually allows them to execute more effectively when a CEO succession plan is necessary. And so I think that transparency is really key when we think about, scrutiny from institutional investors who are really, really reading through that proxy to make decisions about proxy voting and investing decisions, but also other stakeholders who are, looking for transparency in the process.
I want to pick up on that final thread that you just had there, talking about the potential scrutiny from institutional investors and other stakeholders about CEO succession. What are some of the best ways for boards to prepare for that? I mean, it's potentially going to happen. So anything that's disclosed is sort of ripe for reaction. So, what are some of the best ways to prepare?
Yeah, so I think that it's important to, just as any of the issues that boards engage with investors on, to know who your investors are and what they're interested in hearing. So when I did that study that I mentioned, I talked to a lot of the institutional investors about what they look for in disclosure about CEO succession plans. I also talked to a lot of CEOs and management teams about this as well. And there was a big concern that boards had, that investors are looking for information on the names of the people who are on the candidate list for the CEO role. And that is not at all what the goal is. So when engaging with investors, you don't need to be concerned that their request for transparency is about, who are the three people that you're considering for the CEO role when he or she retires. It's more about, tell us the process that you have used to identify internal and external candidates if you are looking externally. How have you as a board thought about, which internal candidates are ready for the CEO role? How have you gotten to know them? What process do you have in place should an emergency happen and the CEO is no longer to come to work the next day? So the CEO or the investors are looking for that type of information about the process and about the business continuity and the ability to continue or advance the culture of the company and the strategic plan and continue that to move forward to drive profitability, as opposed to, wanting to know the inside baseball of what you have planned and who you're talking to.
I'd also imagine one of the things they're looking for is how do you make an assessment of the skill sets needed to run this job, right? And so I'd love to have you reflect a little bit on that. What are some of the most important aspects for boards to think about when they're assessing potential CEO candidates? I mean, how do they create a good, robust set of characteristics and traits that they're looking for in the profile of the candidate? And especially, how should that change if they're looking internally versus externally?
Yeah, and I think this has changed over time as well because, over the last 5, 6 years, we have seen the role of the CEO take on a much more public face than ever before. We've always had some CEOs who were, you know, very present in society and making statements about public issues. But more and more so these days, we have, employees and community members that are looking to CEOs to take stances on issues that are facing society. And so, in addition to the technical skill sets that you want, depending on the industry that you're in, and in the strategic plan in terms of the where you see the company going in terms of product development or markets to access, there's also a lot of focus on who the CEO is as a person and how they relate to other people. So whether it's how are they believable, do they have an authenticity about them that allows them to connect with the employees and connect with the community. Certainly always important, connect with customers and clients. Do they have an empathy that can allow them to respond to crises in a way that is relatable and sincere? And so those are, I think, more so skill sets and aspects of a CEO that boards can be thinking about these days, in addition to the kind of traditional skills and expertise and experience that we want to see in the leader of a large organization. So I was honored to moderate a panel at a recent conference, and Adam Bryant, who used to write the corner office column at the New York Times, he's now with Exco Group, and he shared great insights on this topic. He said that today's uncertain environment really makes it all the more important to kind of, again, look beyond the candidate's resume and really get an understanding of who they are as a person. What were their early influences that who shaped who they are? How does that show up in their leadership today? Um, so that you can understand how they might react in times of crisis. When we are living in these unpredictable and turbulent times, who is the person that's going to show up to continue to lead the business in, in the moment that might be caught on a cell phone camera, for example? Much different times that we're living in that require, in addition to business expertise, strategic, experience, and all of the things that we've always looked for in a CEO, some of those other soft skills that are increasingly important these days.
Well, Annalisa, we have just a couple minutes left here. And so I wanted to kind of ask you a final question about what are some of the common pitfalls that boards might experience during the process? And then just any sort of final thoughts and advice that you have for those who are going through this.
Sure. So actually, Adam had a great point on this as well. He said that, he's written a few books, The Leap to Leader and the CEO Test, where he's looking at some of these questions. And he said that quite often he's seen that boards are looking in the rearview mirror to look for a CEO who is similar to the existing CEO. And quite often you can imagine that this is also for a beloved CEO what your employees are looking for as well. But it's up to the board to have the kind of foresight and the long-term view to think about what are the skill sets, what are the technical expertise, what are the aspects of leadership that we are going to need for the next 5 and 10 years as we evolve as a company, as the economy and our market evolves. And so ensuring that there is a forward-looking profile that is developed that the board holds true to, despite the inclination to go and kind of replace the person who is leaving. Now, that is, of course, in a transition that is planned. It may be that you need to entirely change the skill set and experience level as well. So I think that overall, it really, just like any other of the issues that are high priorities for boards these days and that are, part of their core responsibilities, it's important for the governance process of succession planning to be deliberate and to be something that boards regularly review. So, considering how often on the committee that has this oversight responsibility, how often is succession planning on the agenda, working it into the agenda so it doesn't get dropped off due to, more short-term priorities. We often hear that happening, but really being deliberate about it, being transparent about it so that the market and the employees all have comfort that the organization is positioned for long-term success and can weather a lot of the storms that we're facing today.
Well, Annalisa, thank you so much for joining us on the show. This has been a great conversation about CEO succession planning.
Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here.
We've been joined today by Annalisa Barrett, Senior Advisor at KPMG's Board Leadership Center. Annalisa, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, Meghan, I'm so glad we got a chance to speak with Annalisa. That was a really, really good interview.
Yeah, great food for thought. I mean, I think CEO succession planning is something that the board could spend a lot of its time on. And, you know, despite all of the other things happening, at the board level these days, they still have to find room to, I think, really keep this, number one, number two on the agenda.
I really couldn't agree more. Well, that wraps up another episode of the Corporate Director Podcast, the voice of modern governance. We'd like to say a few special thank yous, first and foremost, to our very own CEO, Brian Stafford, and CEO succession expert, Annalisa Barrett, senior advisor at KPMG's Board Leadership Center, podcast producer, Kira Ciccarelli, and podcast producer, Steve Clayton, our sponsors, PwC, KPMG, Wilson Sonsini, and Meridian Compensation Partners. And most especially, thank you to Diligent for continuing to support this show. If you like our show, please be sure to give us a rating on your podcast player of choice. 5 stars only, please. You can also listen to our episodes and find other information from Diligent Institute at diligent.com/resources. Thank you so much for listening.
You've been listening to the Corporate Director Podcast. To ensure that you never miss an episode, subscribe to the show in your favorite podcast player. If you'd like to learn more about corporate governance and tools to help directors do their job better, visit www.diligent.com. Thank you so much for listening. Until next time.